Tony Sharpless. Tony Lee Sharpless had a relatively normal upbringing. Born on December 27, 1979, in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Her father passed away when she was just 6 years old, and her mother later remarried. At 17, Tony gave birth to her only child, a daughter. By February 2009, Tony and her 12-year-old daughter were living with her mother and stepfather in West Brandywine Township, Pennsylvania. Having graduated from Immaculata University 2 years earlier, Tony worked as an infectious disease nurse at Lancaster General Hospital. On the evening of August 23, 2009, at around 9:30 p.m., the 29-year-old left her home to meet a friend named Crystal Johns. The two had been friends since their teens, but had recently reconnected after a 10-year estrangement. Tony's parents were worried about the outing, especially since she wasn't someone who often went out partying and preferred staying at home with her daughter. Though they were concerned, Tony's parents acknowledged that she hadn't had a night out in a long time and waved her off. After leaving home, Tony picked up Crystal, and the two women went to a nightclub called Ice, where they spent most of the evening. Around 2:57 a.m., Tony's daughter sent a text saying she couldn't sleep. Tony replied, telling her to get some rest and that she'd be home soon. Not long after, Tony and Crystal were invited to a house party at the home of a basketball player named Willie Green, who was staying in Penn Valley, Gladwin. However, just a few hours later, Tony began acting erratically and causing a disturbance at the party. She reportedly became upset with another guest, feeling as if people at the party were mocking her. In her frustration, she started kicking things and poured a bottle of champagne on the floor. As a result, both Tony and Crystal were asked to leave. Tony had worked a 12-hour shift earlier that day and had not slept for 36 hours. Due to Tony's significant drinking and the fact that she had attended rehab for a drink driving incident in April 2009, Crystal attempted to take her keys in hopes of preventing her from driving home. However, Tony snatched the keys back, and the two drove a few blocks before a disagreement broke out. Crystal, concerned about Tony driving, argued with her, but Tony stopped, still crying and upset from the events at the party. Crystal left the car but thought Tony would eventually calm down and return for her. However, she didn't. About an hour later, Crystal called a relative later that morning. Crystal called Tony's home and expressed her frustration to the family about being left stranded in the city with no way to get home. She also mentioned that she had some of Tony's belongings and would bring them over. It was then that she discovered Tony hadn't returned home, prompting Tony's mother, Donna Nabal, to contact the police. About 2 weeks after Tony was last seen in February, an automatic license plate reader in Camden, New Jersey recorded a hit on Tony's license plate number. However, the captured image showed only the plate and not the person driving the vehicle. By the time the police were notified of this hit, several days had passed, and although authorities searched for the car, they were unable to locate it. Tony's mobile has never been recovered and was turned off at around 4 a.m. on the morning of her disappearance. Additionally, there has been no activity on her bank accounts or credit cards since she went missing. Crystal told authorities that Tony's car was low on gas and it was possible she ran out on her way home or went in a different direction to go and get some before she returned home. Since she vanished, there have been several sightings of Tony in Lancaster and Philadelphia, both in Pennsylvania and Camden, New Jersey. All of the sightings occurred in areas known for drug use and prostitution, but none of them have ever been confirmed. During the initial investigation, Tony's friends and family made and distributed flyers, while the police put out a bulletin for her car. In February, Dollar hired a private investigator named Aileen Law to help track down her missing daughter. Aileen took the case for a symbolic fee of $1 in order to make it legal before subsequently setting up a hotline and website specifically for the case. Numerous tips were phoned in, and there were lots of witness sightings of either Tony or her vehicle in various locations, but none of them ever led investigators to the missing 29-year-old or even her car. One woman who came forward claimed to have seen an abandoned black sedan matching the description of Tony's vehicle in Camden under an overpass after crossing the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. This was around 1 o'clock in the morning after she finished her night shift job. Although she claims to have notified the police, the authorities have said they had no record of the call. This tip has fueled speculation that Tony's disappearance was connected with Camden. Her mother Donna said that Tony didn't have a great sense of direction, and she probably would have headed for the nearby Interstate 76 to get home. However, if she headed to the nearest entrance, it would have taken her eastbound, not westbound, which is what she would have needed to return home. The eastbound road would have taken her toward Camden and Philadelphia. Additionally, since Tony was short on gas and didn't have her ATM card, it has been suggested she might have had to rely on the help of strangers. Then, over 3 years after the 29-year-old went missing in February, the PI working on her case, Aileen Lowell received a handwritten letter scribbled on yellow legal-size paper. It refers to Tony Sharpless, although notably Tony was spelled with a Y and not an I. The letter was postmarked November 29, 2012 in Trenton, New Jersey. The writer explained that they had attempted to give their information to the police in Philadelphia but were told it wasn't in their jurisdiction and thus were pointed in the direction of Aileen Law. The writer then claimed they were contacted by a friend at the September 2009 and were offered $5,000 to take a Pontiac Grand Prix, the same type of vehicle as Tony's from Brooklawn, a borough in Camden, New Jersey, to a chop shop in Boston. The writer said they were also told they could have the license plates and were asked if they knew anyone in their late 20s who wanted a paper trip offering a social security card to that person. The term paper trip, according to Aileen, refers to an attempt to create a new identity. It is a term that is mostly used by either law enforcement or criminals. As the letter writer needed money, they agreed to transport the car. After delivering it, they took the plates, wrote down the car vehicle's identification number, and cleared out the glove box where they found Tony's mobile. Upon returning to Camden, they received more information from their friend who claimed that the car wasn't stolen but was missing. A friend of the writer's was allegedly a police officer who got into a fight with a girl. She died and needed to get the car out of Jersey. Afterwards, the writer had put the plates and social security number they had been given into a box before storing it away. But their daughter had recently rediscovered the belongings, prompting the writer to pen their anonymous letter. They included not only the vehicle's license plate number, but also the last 5 digits of its identification number and Tony's phone number. Although Tony's license plate had been public information for quite some time, her phone number and VIN has never been made public, and the information contained in the letter was correct. It has been noted that anyone in law enforcement would have access to Tony's VIN, however. Around this same time, authorities received 2 tips that appeared encouraging but which both turned out to be hoaxes. The first allegedly came from someone at Canadian Security Intelligence Service. They claimed to have found both a vehicle and a woman matching Tony's description on property belonging to the agency, but it turned out this so-called tip had come from a false address and phone number. The Toronto police did not have any such woman in custody, nor did they have a car. The other lead came from a supposed deputy sheriff in South Dakota who said he'd recovered the Grand Prix, but officers at the department said that no one by that name worked there. It is believed that both of these calls came from the same person, although they have never been identified. In February 2017, Aileen Law told the media that she believed the anonymous letter writer's account was plausible. A year before, she said that she had handed over the evidence to the police, who said it would be examined by forensic specialists. However, she has not heard anything back from authorities since and has no idea what, if anything, they have done with the letter. One early theory in Tony's case was that while both drunk and exhausted, she drove her car down a boat ramp into a nearby river, but subsequent searches turned up no sign of the 29-year-old or her Pontiac Grand Prix. Meanwhile, Aileen Lore has proposed that Tony is still alive but is involved with the drug and sex trade. Tony's family believe Crystal Jones may be involved, noting that she pleaded guilty to a harassment charge in February 2005. Additionally, the family questioned her story. Another friend of Tony's said that she would never leave another woman alone on a dark street at night, and questioned why Crystal waited an hour before calling somebody to collect her. The 29-year-olds also wondered if the text sent to her daughter was even from Tony herself, and have asked why the scene of the party was never examined for any signs of a crime. However, Crystal Johns has been ruled out as a suspect and passed the polygraph test. Both she and Willie Green have been described as cooperative and willing to help, and neither them nor anyone else who attended the party have ever been considered suspects. Aileen Law does not believe that Crystal was involved in Tony's disappearance. The 29-year-old Tony Lee Sharpless was last seen on August 23, 2009. when she left her friend behind in Gladwin, Pennsylvania, and drove off sometime around 5 a.m., although some reports from the Charlie Project state it was at 4:45 a.m. Toni is described as a white woman, 5 feet 5 inches tall, with blue-gray eyes and brown hair. When last seen, she weighed 135 pounds, had dyed her hair red, and was wearing a turquoise shirt, black tights, sandals, and turquoise earrings. Toni suffers from bipolar disorder and takes daily medication to manage her condition. It's possible she experienced a manic episode the night she disappeared. At the time, Toni was driving a black 4-door 2002 Pontiac Grand Prix GT with tinted windows and Pennsylvania license plate number DND 7772. If still alive, she would be 41 years old in December. If you have any information about Toni's disappearance, you can contact the West Brandywine Police Department at 610-380-8201 or the Lower Marion Township Police Department at 610-649-1000. Moving on to the next case. Todd Kohlhepp. On November 25, 1986, 15-year-old Kohlhepp kidnapped a 14-year-old girl in Tempe. He threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, brought her back to his home, tied her up, taped her shut, and raped her. Afterwards, he walked her home and threatened to kill her younger siblings if she told anyone what happened. He was caught and charged in 1987 and served 14 years in prison. In August 2001, Kohlhepp was released from prison after serving 14 years and relocated to South Carolina, where his mother resided. On November 6, 2003, a customer discovered 4 people shot to death inside Superbike Motorsports, a motorcycle shop in Chesney. The victims were identified as 30-year-old owner Scott Ponder, 30-year-old service manager Brian Lucas, 26-year-old mechanic Chris Sherbert, and 52-year-old bookkeeper Beverly Guy, who was Ponder's mother. All 4 had been killed by multiple gunshot wounds. Prior to Kohlhepp's confession in 2016, investigators believed that a gunman, armed with a pistol, entered the shop from the back and shot Sherbert while he was working. Kohlhepp then proceeded to kill Guy in the middle of the showroom, Lucas at the main doorway, and Ponder in the parking lot. Moving forward to 2016, 30-year-old Caleb Brown and her boyfriend, Charles Carver, were hired by Kohlhepp, now a prosperous realtor, to work on his land. On August 31st, 2016, they both disappeared after visiting Kohlhepp's property. The growing interest in their disappearance was fueled by strange messages posted from Carver's Facebook account, which led to speculation that someone else had gained access to it. On November 3rd, authorities found Brown chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on Kohlhepp's property, where she had been held captive for the past 2 months. Investigators had tracked her down after tracing the couple's last known cell phone signals, after which they heard banging noises coming from inside the container. A search of Kohlhepp's property recovered Carver's vehicle, which was found in a ravine covered in bush. Kawa was later found dead of multiple gunshots on Kohlhepp's property. Subsequently, Keller revealed that Kohlhepp once dragged her to 3 graves on the property and said that she would go into one of them if she didn't behave. 2 more bodies were discovered on Kohlhepp's property following his arrest. They were later identified as husband and wife, Johnny Joe Coxey and Megan Lee McCrow Coxey, residents of Spartanburg, who were reported missing on December 22, 2015. They were also allegedly hired by Kohlhepp to work on his property. Kohlhepp later confessed to the Chesney shootings and the murders of 2 people whose bodies were found buried on his property. Kohlhepp was charged with 4 counts of murder in relation to Chesney shootings and 1 count of kidnapping in relation to Brown's abduction. He was later charged with 3 additional counts of murder for the murders of Carver and the Coxeys, along with 1 additional count of kidnapping and 3 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of violent crime. On May 26, 2017, Kohlhepp pleaded guilty of 7 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of criminal sexual assault, and was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the next case. The Easy Street Murders. The discovery of the Easy Street murders shocked the residents of Collingwood, Victoria. On January 13, 1977, the neighbors who had grown concerned about the 2 women, Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett, entered the house through the back door after hearing a baby cry. What they found was chilling. Inside, 16-year-old Gregory Armstrong was found alone in his cot, visibly distressed and dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. However, the horror didn't end there. As they looked down the hallway, they discovered the bloody body of Suzanne Armstrong near the front door. The scene was gruesome, and the neighbors immediately fled the house with Gregory, calling the police as soon as they were safely outside. The two victims, Suzanne Armstrong, a 28-year-old single mother, and Susan Bartlett, a 27-year-old arts and crafts school teacher at the Collingwood Education Center, had been brutally murdered in the house. The community was left stunned, and as authorities began to investigate what would later be referred to as one of Victoria's most brutal crimes. Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett had been friends since high school, and after both moved to Melbourne, they began renting the 3-bedroom property on Easy Street in October of 1976. However, their lives took a tragic turn when they were attacked several days before their bodies were discovered on January 13, 1977. Investigators believe the two women were killed on January 10th, the last day anyone had seen or heard from them. On that night, Susan's brother and his girlfriend had visited for dinner, leaving around 9 p.m. On January 11th, Barry Woodard, Suzanne's boyfriend, called the house but received no answer. He tried calling throughout the day, but when he still couldn't reach Suzanne, he decided to visit her home on the 12th. Upon arriving, he entered through the unlocked back door and left a note for her. He called out to her but heard no response, so he left again. His story was corroborated by his brother, who had accompanied him. The deaths of Suzanne and Susan were violent and shocking. Despite multiple attempts by loved ones to check on them, no one could have foreseen the horrific tragedy that would unfold. The investigation into the murders would go on to become one of the most brutal and chilling cases in Victoria's history. Suzanne had been stabbed 29 times and was found on her bed. She had been assaulted after death, and semen was found at the scene. Susan had been stabbed 55 times and was found in the hallway near the front door next to Suzanne's bedroom. Authorities suspected that Suzanne Armstrong had been the intended victim, and that Suzanne was collateral damage and had been slain when attempting to help her friend fend off her attacker. While there were no signs of forced entry, it was reportedly very common for the two Seuss to leave their doors unlocked. Investigators also found one other possible point of entry when they discovered a footprint on the front windowsill. It wasn't the only evidence left behind, however. Authorities also noted that the perpetrator had cleaned up in the bathroom room after the slayings, and a blood-stained towel was found on the sofa in the living room. According to some reports, a bloodied face cloth and shawl were later found a few blocks away. Soon, investigators had established a list of 130 persons of interest, including laborers who were working on the house behind the two women. 2 decades later, in 1999, the DNA found at the crime scene was tested against 8 prime suspects, but none of these men were a match. In fact, despite the long list of potential suspects, the case swiftly grew cold. Although the brutal and violent slayings of the two women made for a high-profile case, only 16 detectives were assigned to it. Police noted that the savage nature of the crimes would have required not only mammoth strength, but also blind rage, which was possibly drug-fueled. They believed that the culprit did not stop committing crimes after the deaths of Suzanne and Susan. 16-year-old Gregory's father was quickly ruled out as being a suspect in the investigation, since he was a Greek fisherman who had never set foot in Australia. Suzanne's boyfriend, Barry Woodard, was also ruled out via DNA. According to one article, the large knife used to attack the two women was recovered near Victoria Park railway station. But according to another article from Independent Australia, this knife was later ruled out as being the murder weapon. After publishing an article on the case, an Australian journalist named Tess Lawrence was annoyed she neglected to mention many other small details about the crime scene, including what record was on the record player. The unidentified man also mocked her observation skills. The caller claimed he was based at the Victoria Barracks and worked in signals but refused to give his name. He then said he'd call Tess back before hanging up abruptly. Although the journalist gave this information to the police, nothing further appears to have come from this bizarre and creepy incident. One theory which seemed strong at the beginning of the investigation was that a journalist named John Grant was somehow involved in the case. In 1975, a young woman from Stockton, California named Julie Garcia Sala was working as a librarian in North Melbourne, Victoria. She vanished from her apartment on July 1st that year. John Grant was a friend of hers and was heavily suspect of being involved with her disappearance. Coincidentally, he'd also been staying next door to the two Seuss on the night they were slain. John Grant had been acquainted with two men who were part of the criminal underworld: John Joseph Power, a violent career criminal, and a boxer named Reese Tommy Collins. These men also became associates of Julie. On the day of her vanishing, both Collins and Power were at Julie's flat. The men later told police that the young woman had exited the room to make a phone call and never returned. But according to Julie's sister, who visited the apartment the following day, a black cape and a knife were missing from the apartment along with $175. She also found that many of her belongings, including her underwear, were scattered around the home. John Grant's potential connection to Julie's case was never proven, and his connection to Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett was ruled out in 2010 when DNA cleared him. However, he remains a suspect in Julie's vanishing. Her case continues to go unsolved. Hopes in the Two Sousas case was raised once again in 2014 when a woman came forward naming an 82-year-old man as being involved with the crime back in 1977. According to a brief news clip, the man was being visited by police so they could collect his DNA. But nothing more came of this lead. The case of Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett remains unsolved, despite significant efforts from authorities and the public. In February 2011, the investigation was reopened, and in February 2017, a $1 million reward was offered to anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the perpetrator. However, even with this substantial incentive, the case has not yet been resolved. Gregory Armstrong, the young son of Suzanne Armstrong, was raised by Suzanne's younger sister, Gail. Gail continues to advocate for her sister's case, working tirelessly to keep it in the public eye and push for answers. The home on Easy Street, where the crime took place, remained vacant for 6 years, but has since changed ownership several times. Anyone with information about the disappearance of Eloise Worledge or the murders of Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett is encouraged to contact Crime Stoppers Australia at +1 800 333 000. Moving on to the next case. The Dniepropetrovsk gay maniacs. Sayenko, Supernjuk, and Hansa were all born in 1988 to wealthy, influential families and attended school together. Hansa had a blood phobia, which Supernjuk suggested they confront by torturing and killing stray dogs. The three of them proceeded to do so, taking photos next to the corpses. After high school, Sayenko and Hansa went on to their respective jobs, while Supernjuk, who was unemployed, became an unlicensed taxi driver. The three friends then began robbing Supernjuk's passengers, with some of them later becoming their victims. Eventually, Sayenko and Supernjuk seemed to lose interest in the robberies and decided to escalate to murdering random people for the thrill. On July 25, 2007, Sayenko and Supernjuk murdered two people, Ekaterina Eljenko and Roman Petrovich, starting their killing spree by selecting random pedestrians and bludgeoning them with blunt objects like hammers and steel construction bars, even recording some of the murders. Several victims were also robbed of their belongings, and multiple bodies were discovered in one day. Additionally, some victims weren't killed in Dnipropetrovsk, but towns located in the surrounding areas. The spree came to attention after a survivor, 14-year-old Vadim Lykov, immediately ran to the police after his friend was murdered by them, and also when a victim, Natalia Marichuk, was beaten to death in front of many witnesses. The investigation was kept secret at first, but eventually, sketches were distributed and the victim's stolen possessions were listed in the local pawn shops. The three were arrested a week after the spree ended, when Supraniak tried selling a mobile phone belonging to one of his victims. The phone had to be turned on to ensure it worked, allowing law enforcement agents to find it and trace its location, leading to the arrests of Sayenko and Supraniak. Meanwhile, authorities invaded Hans's home and arrested him, but not before he managed to erase the information on numerous stolen mobile phones he attempted to flush down the toilet. It was revealed during the maniac's trials that they had filmed several of their murders, one having leaked to the internet and apparently gone viral. The video came to be known as 3 Guys, 1 Hammer and is around 4 minutes long. The video shows the 2 young men murdering a 48-year-old man named Sergei Yatsenko. He is bludgeoned in the face with a hammer repeatedly. His eyes are removed, and he is stabbed in the abdomen and brain with a screwdriver. The 2 discuss the murder calmly, with one expressing surprise that the man was still breathing after the screwdriver was driven into his exposed brain. Sayenko, Sopraniak, and Hansel were all charged with multiple counts of premeditated murder, animal cruelty, robbery, and armed robbery. All 3 immediately confessed, though Sopraniak later withdrew his confession. Ultimately, all 3 were found guilty of their charges. Sayenko and Sopraniak were both sentenced to life in prison. Moving on to the next case. While Henza received Shane Schindler. In the early hours of January 4th, 2017, Las Vegas police discovered the body of 46-year-old homeless man Daniel Aldapi in an empty lot at an intersection near downtown. He had suffered fatal head trauma, and authorities suspected he had been killed while sleeping, bludgeoned with a hammer as he lay wrapped in blankets. A month later, another homeless man, 60-year-old David Dunn, was found dead at the same intersection, also likely struck in his sleep with a hammer. Detectives feared that both victims were the targets of thrill kills, random murders committed purely for the excitement of taking a life. Several months later, another homeless man was attacked but survived, though he was unable to identify his attacker. At this point, police began to consider the possibility of a serial killer. With no leads or suspects, they decided to take a risk by attempting to lure the killer out. Just a few feet from where Aldeep's body was discovered, they set up a decoy, a mannequin draped in blankets and positioned to look like a person sleeping on the sidewalk. They watched on surveillance footage as Shane Schindler, a Michigan native, approached the mannequin with a plastic bag. He watched the dummy for several seconds, then calmly removed his weapon from the bag and launched at the dummy. After striking it twice in quick succession, he walked away slowly. Police swooped on him seconds later and took him into custody. He was charged with 1 count of carrying a concealed weapon and attempted murder. Although Schiller has not been charged in the deaths of 2 homeless men, police said his attacks on the mannequin made it clear he had the intent to kill. During questioning by the police, Schindler admitted that he kicked the decoy and struck it with his hammer, but told investigators he knew it was a mannequin before he attacked it. Shane Schindler is expected to receive a sentence of 8 to 20 years behind bars. Savannah Gold. 29-year-old Lee Rodarte found himself at the center of an investigation following the disappearance of his girlfriend and co-worker, 21-year-old Savannah Gold. Savannah vanished without a trace on August 2nd, 2017. The focus quickly shifted to Lee when surveillance footage revealed Savannah getting into his car at 5:30 p.m. However, Lee was later seen driving away alone, marking the last known sighting of Savannah. This raised many questions about the situation. Had Savannah truly been with Lee that day, or was it just a coincidental encounter? And what really happened to Savannah? Born on April 26, 1996, Savannah Gold was a vibrant 21-year-old from Jacksonville, Florida. She grew up in the heart of the city and developed a strong passion for the arts. Savannah attended the La Villa School of the Arts and later continued her artistic journey at the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. Despite receiving a scholarship to the prestigious Savannah College of Art and Design, Savannah made a selfless decision after high school. In February 2017, when her mother was diagnosed with cancer, Savannah chose to forego her academic opportunity and instead became a strong support for her family. During this time, she took a job as a server at the Bonefish Grill, where she dedicated 2 years of her professional life. It was here, amidst the lively atmosphere of the restaurant, that fate introduced her to Lee, the 29-year-old manager of the Jacksonville location in the Mandarin neighborhood. Lee, a Florida native with 5 years of restaurant experience, played an important role at the eatery. However, the situation took a surprising turn when Savannah and Lee's relationship extended beyond their professional interactions. Although Lee had been in a decade-long relationship with his girlfriend, Chelsea, He and Savannah began finding comfort in each other's company, a bond that ultimately led to Savannah's tragic end. On the evening of Tuesday, August 2nd, 2017, Savannah, wearing her work uniform consisting of black shoes, trousers, and a white chef jacket, left her parents' home for her shift at Bonefish Grill. She left around 5:15 p.m. Savannah's shift at the Bonefish Grill was supposed to start at 5:30 p.m., but she never arrived for work. An hour and 15 minutes after she left her parents' home, Savannah's father received a strange text message from her phone. The message read, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you and Mom, I met a really great guy and we are running away together. I love him and we are leaving tonight. I'll call you later when we get to where we are going." The message was odd, filled with spelling errors, and didn't sound like something Savannah would typically say. Shortly before this, a similar message had been sent to her brother, which read, asterisk, "Hey, I quit. I'm leaving with my boyfriend. I can't do this anything probably meant as anymore. I'm fine, just want to get away." Savannah's family immediately noticed the similarities in the strange, inconsistent messages, which seemed entirely out of character for their daughter. This prompted immediate concern, as it seemed unlikely that Savannah would suddenly make such a drastic decision without informing her family properly. By this point, Savannah's family was certain that something was terribly wrong. They knew their daughter well enough to understand that she wouldn't just abandon her job and family, especially considering how she had previously turned down a scholarship to art school to care for her ailing mother. As concerns grew, the Bonefish Grill, where Savannah worked, also reached out to her parents after she failed to show up for her shift. Alarmed and realizing the gravity of the situation, Savannah's parents, Dan and Sherry, made the decision to contact law enforcement and report her missing. The situation became even more troubling when Savannah's car, a 2007 white Kia Spectra, was discovered in the restaurant parking lot. The car was unlocked, and inside, her purse and ID were untouched. Strangely, the front left tire, which had been replaced just the day before, had been slashed. With Savannah's phone going unanswered and her social media account silent, her parents and co-workers grew increasingly concerned, unable to make sense of these unsettling and mysterious circumstances. Desperate for answers, Savannah's family created a missing persons poster and distributed it throughout the area, hoping for any leads. At the same time, investigators began reviewing CCTV footage in the hope of uncovering crucial clues. One of the most significant pieces of footage came from the Bonefish Grill's parking lot, where Savannah was seen at 5:31 p.m. In the footage, she was seen getting out of her car and walking towards a co-worker's vehicle. They exchanged words through the rolled-down window, and just 14 minutes later, Savannah entered the co-worker's car. What followed was unsettling. The CCTV footage captured what appeared to be a violent struggle inside the car, with the doors opening and closing in what looked like a scuffle. Afterward, Lee, the co-worker, was seen exiting the vehicle and taking something from Savannah's car before slashing her tire. At 6:04 p.m., Lee left his vehicle, and Savannah was never seen leaving his car. The footage left investigators with more questions than answers, adding to the mystery of Savannah's sudden and disturbing disappearance. Right after Savannah's unexplained disappearance, on Wednesday, August 2nd, 2017, an officer was dispatched at 7:12 p.m. to investigate the missing person as reported by Gould's mother. Meanwhile, her family and friends also launched a desperate appeal for help. In the following days of that week, from Thursday to Saturday, they tirelessly sought assistance from the public, distributing flyers in the Mandarin area and using social media to share Savannah's photo. The community joined in the hope of unraveling the reasons surrounding Savannah's sudden disappearance. It was during this period of a heightened concern that law enforcement turned their attention to Lee, a figure so obviously connected to Savannah in the captured security footage. Now, Lee wasn't a stranger. He was someone known to Savannah's close circle. According to Savannah's best friend, there had been multiple encounters between them, including dinners and times spent together outside work. However, the relationship between Savannah and Lee was far from straightforward and was described in online articles as both on again off again, an ex-partnership, an arrangement violating the company's employment policy. Savannah's mother, in an interview, disclosed that she was supposed to have a meeting with Lee, but he failed to show up. Coming back to a closer look at the crime scene, when the police arrived at the diner, the restaurant's employees were questioned, including the manager, Lee. Interestingly, during the initial searches for Savannah, Lee made a comment of not having met Savannah for 2 to 3 weeks, which was a statement that contradicted the video evidence. Lee, who was also later involved in distributing Savannah's missing persons flyers along with her family, was seemingly unaware that his actions on the day of the missing had been captured on surveillance cameras. Scrutinizing the footage revealed that a little while after Savannah was inside the Malibu, the car began to rock, indicating an ongoing struggle inside. The driver then came out of the vehicle, kicked the back door open 3 times before returning to the driver's seat. The car then drove away, leaving Savannah unaccounted for. Further investigation revealed that Lee owned a silver Chevy Malibu matching the one captured in the footage. Detectives promptly brought him in for questioning, where his initial denial of having seen Savannah in the recent past slowly crumbled. Lee admitted to lying and revealed a new narrative. During the subsequent interrogation, Lee shared his version of events regarding their relationship. He admitted to having been in a relationship with Savannah for approximately 8 months. Acknowledging that he had already had a girlfriend at the time they started the affair. Lee claimed that they bonded over their challenging backgrounds and their connection deepened over the February 1st to 3 months. However, he asserted that their association took a turn when Savannah began engaging in drug use. While he admitted to doing drugs with her a couple of times, Lee claimed that he distanced himself when her drug use escalated. According to him, he and his ex-girlfriend Chelsea started reconnecting while Savannah was still struggling with the drug addiction. Though not explicitly stated in the interrogation, the relationship between Lee and Savannah contributed to his breakup with Chelsea. Regarding his relationship with Savannah, Lee contended that Savannah's drug use was the primary reason for bringing an end to their time together. He claimed that after an overdose incident, Savannah got off drugs, appeared healthier, and they resumed texting. However, Lee maintained that he eventually broke off contact with Savannah, and they mutually agreed not to communicate outside of work. Now the interrogation took a darker turn as Lee Redarte described Savannah's alleged spreading of lies at their common workplace. He asserted that a few days before the incident, she was telling colleagues that they had hooked up recently, claiming an ongoing intimate relationship and asserting that Lee was still her boyfriend. According to Lee, these rumors were affecting his managerial position, and he expressed his concern about potential consequences to Savannah. This meeting unfolded in the Bonefish restaurant's parking lot on the evening of August 2nd, as Lee claimed. He contended that Savannah claimed to have just done, and upon feeling paranoid, requested to sit in his car. Lee claimed that Savannah refused to cease spreading lies among their co-workers, prompting him to puncture her tire as a symbolic warning. According to Lee, he got out of his car, went towards Savannah's car, and stuck a knife into the front driver's side tire. He then returned to his car and demanded she stop spreading rumors. Now, according to him, after he punctured her tire, Savannah got out of his car and entered a green mid-90s Ford pickup. In this part, he claims that while being in his car, she used her phone, and 5 minutes later, the green truck arrived at the parking lot. Savannah got into the truck, which then drove away. Lee claimed the windows were tinted, preventing him from identifying the driver so that he couldn't even figure out if it was a guy or a lady behind the wheel. This is where the detectives found Lee's story puzzling, questioning why he hadn't mentioned the green truck in their initial conversation. Despite their efforts, Lee stuck to his claim of not knowing where Savannah was. They then shocked him by revealing they had video evidence of the entire incident. They emphasized that Savannah never left Lee's car, contradicting his version of events. Lee eventually realized the gravity of the situation. Despite this, he continued to deny any knowledge of Savannah's whereabouts. Now here's where the detectives pointed out the inconsistencies in Lee's changing stories and urged him to tell the truth for Savannah's family's sake. They revealed that the surveillance footage they possessed also had captured a struggle in the back seat of Lee's car. The presence of the footage really shook Lee. He initially said Savannah tried to stab him and he slapped her. He then admitted grabbing her to stop her from leaving, but claimed he later calmed down and they left together. The detectives questioned the troubling nature of his actions, focusing on the seriousness of forcibly preventing Savannah from leaving. Despite his admission of having vigorously restrained her, Lee kept insisting that their conversation ended peacefully on that day. As the detectives pressed for an honest confession from Lee, they highlighted the act of him stopping Savannah from leaving, which again pointed out the inconsistencies in his evolving stories. Lee continuously shifting stories raised concerns about his credibility and sincerity in cooperating with the investigation. The detectives pressured him repeatedly over the importance of justice for Savannah Gold and her grieving family. And in the end, Lee admitted to killing Savannah, describing the violent encounter in his car. According to Lee's final confession, a heated argument in his car escalated into a struggle, resulting in the death of Savannah. As per his account, Savannah allegedly initiated physical contact by squeezing around his chest and neck. In an attempt to break free, Lee claimed he moved her hands away with brute force, mistakenly thinking they were around his shoulders. However, the situation took a horrifying turn when he heard a pop sound, later realizing it was Savannah's neck and thereby severing her spine. Despite the initial struggle, Lee asserted that he was merely trying to get Savannah to release her grip. But the surveillance video contradicted this claim and indicated Savannah's desperate attempts to escape. After the fatal incident, Lee retrieved a makeup bag from Savannah's car, possibly in an attempt to later create the illusion that she had left with someone else. He then drove away, disposed of Savannah's phone, threw her clothes out of the car, and attempted to burn her body in his backyard fire pit. Being unsuccessful in his attempt to incinerate the body quickly, Lee resorted to burying Savannah in his backyard. The crime scene investigators later discovered gas cans and an empty bleach bottle at his residence. As authorities were progressing to close in on their investigation, Lee's paranoia escalated, leading him to exhume Savannah's body the following morning and relocate it to the trunk of his car. Driving to a familiar fishing spot, he carelessly dumped her body in a pond and discarded her clothes along the highway. The police intervention on August 5, 2017 marked a crucial moment, prompting Lee to confess to the murder and reveal the location where he had disposed of Savannah's body. The desperate search for Savannah Gold reached a dark conclusion on the late Saturday evening of August 5th, when Jacksonville police dug up her lifeless body from a lake on the west side. After having confessed to the crime, Lee was finally brought to justice on November 17, 2017 as he faced serious charges, including second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a dead body. Despite his admission, he pleaded not guilty, deploying a stand-your-ground motion claiming self-defense. This legal maneuver originating from Florida law allowed individuals to justify murder as an act of self-defense if they genuinely feared for their lives. Notably, this law gained notoriety with the George Zimmerman case involving Trayvon Martin. While this law served to protect those genuinely fearing harm, its application had become contentious, often leading to controversial claims of self-defense. Lee's attempt to utilize the stand-your-ground defense, however, encountered substantial challenges. Crucial factors such as the significant difference in physical stature between Lee, being 5 feet 11, 8 pound 163, and Savannah, being 5 foot and 8 pound 91, raised skepticism. His side of the story during the interrogation, describing an accidental death during a struggle with his ex-girlfriend, clearly contradicted the concept of self-defense. Particularly troubling was his statement about putting her back forcefully while she attempted to leave, which was hardly reflective of someone fearing for his life. Medical examinations further undermined Lee's claims. Absence of a broken neck and the absence of drugs in Savannah's system contradicted Lee's assertions about her drug abuse history and her accidental death during a physical struggle. Her fractured thyroid cartilage hinted at a possible strangulation rather than an accidental accord to second-degree murder in exchange for a 40-year prison sentence. This marked the end of a legal battle where Lee's defense crumbled in the light of forensic evidence and the court's decision to deny his self-defense claim. Unraveling more into Lee's life, it was discovered that Lee's family had a criminal background. His sister, Amber Camarillo, at the age of 26, had been arrested in 2016 for shooting and killing Raquel Wallace on December 6, 2016 at a Jacksonville motel. The incident stemmed from a dispute over a car that one of Amber's friends had traded for drugs. This dark truth depicted a somber picture of a family with a dark history of violence. As Savannah's family sat one last time in the courtroom facing the man who ended their daughter's life, Sharon Gold, Savannah's mother, expressed her determination not to let Savannah's murder control their lives any further. Daniel Gold, Savannah's father, recounted the heart-wrenching moment watching the surveillance footage witnessing his daughter's last struggle for life. Sharon, trying to comprehend the unimaginable loss, shared her precious memories, emphasizing the profound impact Savannah had on everyone who knew her. During the trial, Lee kept his back turned to the grieving family, indicating no remorse. Amidst the pain, the family expressed hope that the conclusion of the trial would bring some semblance of peace. The purple butterflies on the jackets of Savannah Gold's parents became a poignant symbol of the peace they tried to hold on to amidst their grief. In the wake of their daughter's tragic passing, they drew strength from the unwavering love they had for her, a love that refused to be broken by the pain of loss. During an interview, Savannah's mother, overwhelmed with sorrow, shared her thoughts on capital punishment. While she opposed it, her desire for Lee to endure eternal suffering reflected the deep wound caused by the loss of her daughter. Savannah's Facebook page has become a public memorial, a powerful reminder of a life taken too soon. In response, a GoFundMe campaign was created to help honor her memory. Funds were directed toward her funeral expenses as well as charitable causes she was passionate about, including animal welfare, her art school, and organizations supporting victims of domestic violence. This collective effort allowed Savannah's story to spark positive change, even amidst the overwhelming tragedy. Amidst the darkness, Lee made a remorseful phone call to Chelsea, his longtime girlfriend, expressing shock and dismay over the events. Chelsea, who had never experienced violence from him, spoke of the complexity in understanding the person behind the crime, highlighting the profound contrast between the man she knew and the horror of the crime that unfolded. Moving on to the next case. Juana Rosa Ziegel. On January 27, 1996, the body of an unidentified woman was discovered by a passerby in Beaumont, California. The body was found in a rural, hilly area, in a ravine south of the eastbound Highway 60 near Gilman Springs Road. A couple driving through the area flagged down a law enforcement officer to inform him of the body by the roadside. When investigators arrived at the scene, they believed she had been deceased for several hours prior to being found. The victim appeared to be Hispanic, Indian, or possibly Asian. She was discovered lying on her back with a gunshot wound to her head. There was also evidence of assault. The woman had no identification or purse with her. Her clothing was clean and in good condition. No investigative leads were available at the time of the discovery. A short tandem repeat profile of the woman was obtained and entered into California's missing and unidentified person database. She was estimated to be between 30 and 45 years old. Her hair and eyes were brown. She stood about 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed approximately 130 pounds. The woman also had a surgical scar on her right abdomen. Surrounding agencies were contacted regarding possible missing persons matching the description of the Jane Doe. Her case was also entered into NAMAs. Detectives had a composite sketch of her completed and utilized local media in an attempt to generate investigative leads. Eventually, with all leads exhausted and still no closer to identifying the woman, the case went cold. Recently, the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Team partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy to generate new leads in the case. Forensic DNA evidence was sent to Othram and their scientists using forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile. The profile was returned to law enforcement investigators who then used the profile to conduct genetic genealogy research. Using genealogy and other public databases such as the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, investigators located the victim's 4 daughters. The California Department of Justice Riverside Crime Lab, through its Missing and Unidentified Person System, was then able to positively identify the victim as Juana Rosa Ziegel of the Los Angeles area. The announcement of the investigation was made on June 26, 2023. She was 41 years old when her life was taken. One of Juana's daughters expressed, "He destroyed my family. He didn't just take the life of one person, he took the lives of all of us. I really, really wish that if someone knows something, they can come forward." She continued, "For me, all of this is so difficult. But at the same time, I really want to know who is responsible. Detectives believe there are still friends, neighbors, or colleagues of Juana who may have more information that could help shed light on her disappearance. Anyone with knowledge of Juana or any additional information is urged to contact detectives at 951-955-0740 or 951-955-2777. Moving on to the next case. Melissa Lee. Melissa Lee, a 15-year-old girl from Bothell, Washington, was abducted from her home between 9:30 p.m. and midnight on April 13, 1993. The following day, her body was discovered in a ravine in Everett, Washington. It was clear that she had been strangled and assaulted, but it remained unclear whether she knew the suspect or what led to her tragic death. In Melissa's address book, investigators found the name, Michael, along with the phone number. This led them to Alan E. Dean, a 35-year-old man who went by the name Michael. He had been dating Melissa, which raised suspicions. In addition, Alan had previously been accused of assaulting a minor in Arizona. Though the police were confident in his involvement, they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Despite pursuing numerous leads and interviewing several people, the case eventually went cold. In 2020, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office sought the assistance of Parabon Nanolabs, a genetic genealogy company. Parabon performed an analysis on evidence collected from the crime scene, hoping to uncover new information that could lead to the identification of the perpetrator. One of these items was a discarded cigarette butt. This led them to several of the suspect's family members. Finally, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab could confirm that the DNA at the crime scene matched the DNA of now 62-year-old Alan E. Dean. In July 2020, he was arrested without incident at his home. Adam Fortney, a Snohomish County sheriff, had this to say: "The arrest yesterday shows how our detectives' determination, combined with new advancements in DNA technology, continues to get us one step closer to justice for victims and their families even decades later." Investigators said the case is still under investigation, and they asked that if anyone had information about Dean's activities around 1993 to come forward. Investigators said the suspect used the fake name of Mike Alanidian remains in the Snohomish County Jail with bail set at $2 million. Melissa's mother, Sharon Lee, said, "I'm just happy to have lived long enough to see this happen. I hope he rots in hell." Moving on to the next case. Jonathan Luna. Attempting to understand the psychology of individuals who commit violent acts is challenging for many, as the act of murder itself is often seen as bizarre and difficult to comprehend. However, there are cases that go beyond even expert understanding. Born on October 21, 1965, he was a married father of two who had grown up in the South Bronx, New York City. After studying at the University of North Carolina School of Law, he worked in several high-profile roles before eventually becoming an assistant U.S. attorney in Baltimore. On the evening of December 4, 2003, he was working a late shift at the Baltimore courthouse, preparing for a case the following morning in which he would prosecute two defendants in a drug conspiracy trial. Around 9 p.m., he called a coworker to inform them that he would be leaving soon to continue his work at home. He had also contacted the defense attorney earlier that evening, promising to send over some documents, but he never followed through. Despite telling his colleague he was leaving soon, Jonathan didn't actually exit the building until 11:38 p.m. Oddly, he had left his glasses, which he needed to drive, and his mobile phone on his desk. He drove northeast on the I-95 and passed several toll booths, 3 to be precise. He used his Easy Pass to get through them. However, after this, he switched to purchasing toll tickets. At 12:57 a.m., $200 was withdrawn from Jonathan's bank account from an ATM machine at JFK Plaza Service Center near Newark, Delaware. After this, Jonathan's electronic fingerprints shows him at 2:47 a.m. as he crossed the Delaware River toll bridge. And about half an hour later, activity on his debit card showed that he'd purchased gas at the King of Prussia Service Plaza. The last journey that Jonathan made was at 4:04 a.m. when his car exited the turnpike at the Reading-Lancaster interchange. A spot of blood was noticed on his toll booth tickets, and it was speculated that the 38-year-old had already been injured. At 5:30 a.m., Jonathan's car was found parked at 1439 Dry Tavern Road in Denver, Pennsylvania. A passerby noticed the car with its lights off and its front end in a creek. Blood was smeared on the driver's door and on the left section of the car whilst Jonathan was face down in the stream under the car engine. He still wore his suit and black overcoat, and his court ID was hanging around his neck. As authorities were called in and the gruesome scene of the death was investigated, more troubling information was found. There was a pool of blood in the car on the rear seat floor, and it was found that Jonathan Luna had been stabbed 36 times with his own pocket knife, with the wounds concentrated around his neck and chest. He had also incurred a head injury, although his final cause of death was ruled by several coroners as homicide by drowning. Despite the words of several experienced coroners, the FBI, who also looked into the case, determined that Jonathan had died by suicide, and strangely, they pushed for the medical examiners and the Lancaster County authorities to concur with the statement. The FBI argued that the wounds on Jonathan's hands were shallow and looks like hesitation wounds that one would find on the body of a suicide victim. They claimed he did not have substantial defense wounds. They suggest a motive for taking his own life centered around the fact that $36,000 had gone missing from a bank robbery case he had prosecuted, and that Jonathan was going to be facing a polygraph test in relation to this. They also said it was possible he had attempted to stage an abduction and attack to excuse him from inquiries or perhaps garner sympathy from investigators. However, local authorities and coroners dismissed these attempts at smearing Jonathan's name. One of the coroners in the case said that Jonathan's hands had been shredded by self-defense wounds, and any shallow wounds he'd received were likened to torture. Jonathan's throat had been slashed, and he had sustained wounds on his back. The blood in the back seat of the car suggested to police that he had been in the rear while somebody else was driving the vehicle. A second blood type was found in the car, as well as partial prints which did not belong to Jonathan. These have both yet to be linked to anyone, as suspects and motives in the case remain hard to determine. Grainy CCTV footage from near the time of the gas station purchase made with Jonathan's credit card was recovered, but doesn't seem to have provided any new leads. He was not seen on the camera, but several workers came forward to claim that they had seen him that night and he'd appeared calm. The $200 that had been withdrawn littered his car and bills. Rumors began circulating as the mysterious case of Jonathan Luna made headlines, many of which tarnished the lawyer's reputation. Speculation arose about his strained relationship with his boss and claims that he was on the verge of being fired, though another U.S. attorney clarified that Jonathan's job was not in jeopardy. No substantial evidence was found to support the allegations that he was involved in the missing $36,000. An unusual detail that surfaced was that Jonathan's name appeared on either a dating website or was used to solicit sex from prostitutes, but it remained unclear whether Jonathan himself was involved or if someone else had simply used his name. The 38-year-old also accumulated $25,000 in debt, including $17,000 on credit cards, a fact his wife claimed to be unaware of. A reward of $100,000 is currently being offered for any information that leads to a conviction in the case. However, as of 2020, the investigation into Jonathan Luna's disappearance remains open and unsolved. Bong Siribun. Siriacorn Siribun, affectionately called Bong by her family and friends, was an energetic and outgoing student at Borneo Heights College. Known for her deep passion for education, music, and dance, her life was tragically interrupted by an unexplained disappearance in February. This event left everyone who knew her, from her family in the Melbourne suburbs to people across all of Australia, desperately searching for answers amidst a sea of puzzling evidence. In an effort to provide more clarity based on available facts and situational analysis, this investigation delves into Bong Siribun's disappearance in the Boronia area, unraveling the mysteries that followed. Bong was born on December 30th, 1997, just after Christmas, in Ubin Ratchathani, a province in northeastern Thailand. She was the second daughter in her family, following her older sibling, Siraporn, or Pang as she was affectionately called. Unfortunately, the once happy family of four didn't remain intact for long. The relationship between Bong's mother and father deteriorated, and he eventually left when the girls were still quite young. As their father gradually faded from their lives, Bong and her sister Pang spent most of their time under the care of their mother, Benita. For several years, the sisters adjusted to their life with their mother until February 2004, when Benita met Fred Pattison, an Australian traveler. Fred had fallen in love with Thai culture in the 1990s and made it a point to travel back and forth between Australia and Thailand every year. During one of these visits, Fred and Veneta unexpectedly connected, and their friendship blossomed into a deep, healthy relationship. Over the next 2 years, the couple maintained a long-distance relationship, and in February 2006, Fred moved to Thailand, intending to stay permanently after he and Veneta married. Both Bong and Pang embraced Fred's presence in their lives, welcoming him as a loving father figure. Fred referred to them as his own daughters, and they cherished the connection with him. However, despite the strong familial bonds, the financial side of their new marriage struggled. Fred and Veneta attempted to start a small business manufacturing awnings, but the venture faced significant challenges. Unfortunately, the market proved too sparse for the venture to succeed, and the promising business quickly fell into failure. In an effort to lessen the family's losses, Fred returned to Australia and worked as a fitter for a Cadbury factory in Victoria. In February 2008, Veneta, Pang, and Bong joined him in Australia, and the couple worked tirelessly to secure a better future for the girls. Veneta found a job to support the family, ensuring that the sisters would receive a proper education, while she and Fred worked toward the dream of eventually returning to Thailand. As a result, Pang and Bong were enrolled in the Byronia Heights School District, located in the bustling suburb of Byronia in Melbourne, Victoria. Bong began 4th grade at Byronia Heights Primary School and quickly made friends, one of whom was Jaya Mai Hillard. Jia remained close with Bong throughout primary school and into high school. Jia later described Bong to reporters as an incredibly kind and compassionate young woman. She shared that Bong always radiated happiness, rarely losing her smile. This joyful spirit was one of the reasons Bong could make friends so easily, and it was why she and Jia got along so well. Bong had no fear and embraced challenges and new experiences without hesitation. Although she was naturally reserved, she was incredibly polite, and once she became comfortable in a new environment, she would thrive, radiating energy and joy. Another friend, Layla Preston, would later describe how Bong genuinely enjoyed school, feeding off the creativity of others while nurturing her own imagination. While Bong excelled in mathematics and science, her true passions lay in the arts, particularly dance and drama. At the time, her favorite artist was Justin Bieber, alongside various K-pop groups. In 2011, Bong had been rehearsing a dance routine with Jia Mai, which she had choreographed herself. This project was particularly close to her heart, and Jia Mai could sense Bong's excitement about showcasing their hard work. This was why Jia Mai struggled to comprehend the events that unfolded later that June, when Bong disappeared on a seemingly normal Thursday morning walk to school. It was a quiet, unsettling moment in the streets of Byronia under the early morning sun. Now let's review the timeline of events leading up to the unsolved disappearance of Bong Serving. Since her high school years began, Bong had been walking to Byronia Heights College on her own, a routine that was permitted by both her mother and stepfather. The Sarabun family lived on Elsie Street, just a short 10-minute walk from the school. It was a familiar and easy route for Bong, and she often made the trek alongside her classmates and close friends, including Taylor and of course Jia Mai. Jia Mai and Bong even had a spot at a nearby park where they would meet on their way to and from school, sometimes sharing snacks or chatting about the latest happenings. However, on the morning of June 2nd, 2011, Taylor told her brother that she was going to walk with him to school when he asked if she wanted to head to Bong's house and walk together instead. It wasn't unusual for Taylor to walk with her brother, as she and Bong didn't always walk to school together. That same Thursday morning, Bong's alarm clock went off sometime after 7 a.m. She got out of bed, put on her usual school uniform, and had egg rice soup for breakfast. Around 8 a.m., Bong's stepfather Fred returned home from his graveyard shift at the Cadbury factory. He went into a back room while Bong continued getting ready for the day. By 8:30 a.m., Bong said goodbye to Fred and left the house, just as she did every other school day. A short time later, a neighbor spotted Bong heading east down their road toward Albert Avenue. The neighbor would later tell authorities that Bong appeared to be in good spirits and showed no signs of distress, dressed in her usual school uniform and a blue raincoat. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Bong's Sarabin. A few minutes after that, it is assumed that Bong reached the end of Elsie Street where it meets the busy Albert Avenue. She crossed through traffic every day and was likely heading southwest, making her usual right turn. After walking 1 block along Albert Avenue, Bong is thought to have turned left onto Harcourt Road, a quieter, less busy street compared to Albert Avenue. At 8:55 a.m., another neighbor reportedly spotted Bong walking along Harcourt Road near the intersection with the Monco Street cul-de-sac. This spot was just 130 meters from the gate at the end of Monco Street, which led to Baronia Heights College, the school Bong and her friends would enter each morning. It remains uncertain whether Bong ever reached that gate that day, and the Harcourt Road sighting was never confirmed by the police. When school began, both Baronia Heights College staff and Bong's friends assumed she was absent for the day, as her excellent attendance record suggested no reason for her to miss class. Due to this assumption, Bong's parents, Vanita and Fred, believed she had made it to school safely, and no alarms were raised throughout the day. It wasn't until around 3:40 p.m. that afternoon when Vanita began to wonder where Bong was, noting that her daughter was usually home by that time. As the clock struck 4 p.m., the phone rang at the Sarah Boone household. Fred answered the call, expecting nothing out of the ordinary, only to be surprised when he heard Jeremiah Hillard's voice on the other end. Jeremiah asks Fred if she could speak with Bond to catch up on what she missed and discuss what was coming up at school. Fred, confused, asks why Jeremiah hadn't spoken to Bong earlier at school, to which Jeremiah explains that Bong had never shown up. It's then that both Jeremiah and Bong's parents realize, to their shock, that Bong has gone missing without anyone noticing. Within minutes, Vanita and Fred rush to their car and head to Baronia Heights College. There, the principal confirms that Bong was absent that day. At 4:20 p.m., the distressed couple arrives at the Knox police station. The officers advise them to contact all relatives and close friends to see if Bong might have gone to stay with someone. However, their efforts to reach anyone familiar with Bong yield no results. Undeterred, Vanita and Fred visit Jeremiah and ask her to help contact Bong's friends later that evening to gather more information. Jeremiah suggests checking the park where Bong and she often met on their way to and from school, but there is no sign of Bong there either. Throughout the night of June 2nd and into the early hours of June 3rd, Vanita and Fred go to each of Bong's friends' houses in person, desperately hoping for any updates or clues. Nobody shares anything useful, and after the round-robin of cold calls, the distressed couple return to Knox Police Station. As the day of June 3rd progresses, an official search goes underway. The Knox PD canvasses the area, knocking on the door of every neighborhood home, while distributing missing persons flyers across the town and its neighboring suburbs. The streets are rapidly filled with search and rescue volunteers. By the time the evening news rolls around, multiple broadcast stations have heard about the hunt for Bong Sarah Boone and blast her story on all the major networks. Reporters are diligent in asking the public for help, and it seems a real momentum is building. Over the next few days, the investigators pore over hours upon hours of CCTV footage from area cameras found at local businesses and public transportation stations. They also pay visits to all registered sex offenders in Victoria, feeling more and more that Bum's disappearance is at the hands of a kidnapper. The days turn to weeks, and authorities send officers into the Dandenong Rangers National Park and other mountainous woodlands to search for Bum. Despite multiple attempts, no clues are pulled from the nature reserves or hiking trails. Around the same time in February, 2 separate teenage girls come forward with testimonies relating to kidnapping attempts in the days after Bong went missing. However, either story is believed to be related to Bong's case after one was proven to be a hoax. In October of that year, for months after Bong's vanishing, Police put together the Puma Task Force, a special rank of detectives to focus on the manhunt for Bung Sarabin. Puma is the first major focus group in a police investigation since 2003 in Melbourne, Australia. Over the next 2 years, the Puma Task Force receives over 900 calls, investigates 250 known sex offenders, searches over 1,000 homes, and collects over 1,100 pieces of evidence. However, they find nothing substantial and the case continues to grow cold. In February, the task force is shut down and all of its files and findings are handed back to homicide detectives of local police ranks. Years go by and various leads are presented to investigators. Yet a lot of the calls are proven to be hoaxes, including false confessions made by Melbourne locals. On the 5-year anniversary of Bong's disappearance, police turned to the public asking for help in clearing up a couple of alleged sightings of Bong back in February. However, nothing of merit comes through. In the years following Bong's disappearance, both law enforcement and her friends and family have remained determined to find answers. They continue to believe that someone knows what happened to the 13-year-old schoolgirl and have offered a $1 million reward for information leading to her discovery. Detectives and sleuths alike work tirelessly, hoping for that breakthrough that will reveal what happened to Bong. As with many missing persons cases involving children, Bong's case saw an outpouring of potential sightings in the days following her disappearance, many of which were reported by concerned citizens who had noticed something unusual. These reports were often based on fleeting impressions and lacked solid evidence, as is common when tragedy strikes a community and emotions run high. However, not all reports can be dismissed. In June 2016, detectives revealed 2 separate testimonies that caught their attention. Both accounts shared strikingly similar details, involving a man with various tattoos and a white car. Both sightings occurred between 15 and 30 minutes after Bong left her home in the Boronia suburb on the morning she vanished. The first of these sightings took place around 8:45 a.m., approximately 15 minutes after Bong's departure. The witness reportedly saw a young Asian girl matching Bong's appearance looking out the back window of a white Ford Falcon, either an EA or an EF manufactured sometime between 1988 and 1996. The white car was seen heading east at the intersection of Boronia Road and Florestan Road, driven by an older white male in his 50s or 60s, sporting slicked back brown hair in a rock and roll style and tattoos all over his arms, including a noticeably colorful tattoo on the upper section of his left arm near the shoulder. There are also some reports that state the driver was wearing a blue singlet. However, this has not been confirmed. The second sighting took place around 15 minutes after the first, between 8:45 a.m. and 9 a.m. on June 2nd, likely 30 minutes after Bunk left home. The big difference with this testimony is it came near the town of Rowville on Napoleon Road, an area roughly 9 to 10 kilometers south of Boronia. The eyewitness told police they saw a girl matching Bong's description sitting in the passenger seat of a white station wagon as it progressed through the morning traffic. From memory, the witness described the white vehicle as a Holden HQ Kingswood, an older model originating from somewhere between 1971 and 1973. The driver of the station wagon was also a white male, but appearing to be more middle-aged, in his 30s or 40s. The witness couldn't tell if the man was balding or just had incredibly light-colored hair, but did mention he showed tattoos covering his neck and arms like sleeves. What he was wearing couldn't be discerned either. While most investigators believe that these sightings are separate instances and likely disconnected, they could technically be of the same car, driver, and horrifyingly enough, the same passenger. If the first sighting did occur at 8:45 a.m., it's possible that it could have made its way southbound on the Napoleon Road and headed towards Rovo by 9 a.m. in order for the second sighting to take place. We have checked various mapping and GPS resources, and at least in 2020 conditions, the drive from the intersection of Boronia and Florestan Road to the southernmost point of Napoleon Road at 8:45 a.m. on a weekday commute is between 11 and 15 minutes. We assume the traffic patterns haven't changed drastically enough since 2011 to suggest it wouldn't have been possible 9 years ago on the morning of June 2nd to make this trip, thus providing the possibility that the first and second sightings are of the same vehicle. It is also worth considering one of the witnesses misread the make and model of the car, or didn't get a good enough look at the driver to properly account for their age and hairstyle. That being said, A Kingswood station wagon and a 1988 Ford Falcon really don't look too much alike in suggesting someone mistook a 60-year-old man with slicked-back dark hair for a 35-year-old man with short blonde hair seems a little far-fetched. Thus, we don't firmly believe the sightings to be connected or reflecting of the same situation. However, we, like the police, do believe there are good odds that at least one of them could involve the real-life Bong Seraphin. We therefore ask that if anyone recognizes these descriptions of either the white cars and/or the tattooed men, please reach out to the proper authorities. These sightings have not been ruled out as of today and could be the major clue to taking the next step in finding Bong and bringing closure. Let's now take a look at the most prominent theories surrounding the unsolved disappearance of Bong Seraphin. Like many missing children and teen cold cases, parents and guardians are always questioned in the early days of an investigation. As history suggests, many kids who disappear do so at the hands of their caretaker or family member. Thus, the first person both police and bystanders alike looked to for possible suspicion was Fred Patterson, Bong's stepfather and paternal role model. An anonymous source, most likely a fellow Baronian neighborhood resident, tipped off authorities that they had witnessed Fred digging around their LC Street home in the weeks that followed Bong's disappearance. When law enforcement approached Fred as a suspect, he happily complied, and he and Vanetta allowed detectives to search every nook and cranny of their home, including excavation around their property. Police found zero evidence to suggest that their parent was responsible or held any troubling secrets, and authorities thanked them for their openness and cooperation. However, it didn't dampen the whispers spreading around town that Fred was up to no good. With many people questioning without fair evidence his motives in embedding himself in Thai culture and bringing back 3 women to Australia with him. There were suspicions that Fred had hidden motives in his relationship with his wife and 2 daughters, fueled by prejudice and insecurities surrounding interracial marriage. As the case developed, these biases gave rise to elaborate theories, some even suggesting Fred might be involved in Bong's disappearance. However, the investigation quickly shifted focus, and police considered Bong's birth father, still living in Thailand, as a potential suspect. International law enforcement agencies were brought in to trace this lead. But ultimately, it led nowhere, and Bong's father was cleared of any involvement just as swiftly as he was initially suspected. By the June 2011, it was clear that Bong had not disappeared voluntarily. She had likely been abducted. As the case progressed into July, investigators suburbs. 2 young women came forward with testimonies about attempted kidnappings in the weeks surrounding Bong's disappearance. The first report came from a 16-year-old girl in Ringwood, a town just 10 minutes away from Baronia. On June 21, 2011, she told police that a blue sedan had pulled up alongside her as she walked along Ringwood Road. The male driver had rolled down his window and tried to entice her into the car, but the girl refused, and the driver continued down the road, pulling into the hard shoulder ahead of her. The girl continued walking, and as she passed the blue sedan, the male driver exited the car and grabbed her arm from behind. In a stunning feat of courage, the 16-year-old girl fought off the would-be abductor, scratching and clawing at the offender until he let go. Once out of his grip, the girl sprinted into the nearby shrubbery and camouflaged herself from the man's view. A few moments later, he got back into his blue sedan and drove away, never to be seen again. When describing the man to authorities, the girl said he was in his late 50s or early 60s, sporting dark-colored clothes, graying hair, and most notably, decaying teeth. The best comparison she could make with his appearance in general was to that of a man from Southern European descent. From a broader perspective, the timing of the abduction attempt did not sit well with investigators who were worried about a serial offender. However, other detectives pointed out the more detailed inconsistencies. While the 2 neighborhoods are close in comparison with the rest of the country, Bam was Asian while this girl was white. In addition, Bam's disappearance came in the early morning, where this girl was approached in the afternoon. Of course, these points didn't disprove any connection, but it was enough to raise the eyebrows of everyone involved. Then came the second testimony that seemed to confirm everyone's worst nightmare. Just over a week later, on June 29th, a second young girl alerted authorities of an attempted abduction. This girl was just 11 years old but was of Asian descent and lived in Baronia as well, even knowing Bong personally from playing around the neighborhood. The specific details of the kidnapping attempt were not clarified. However, law enforcement did say they were similar to the Ringwood case and released the sketch of the alleged perpetrator as described by the 11-year-old girl. The man was older in the same age range as the Ringwood offender, wore a matching red and dark gray sweatsuit as well as white-rimmed glasses, and most creepily of all, a surgical mask. After the public caught a glimpse of the disguised attacker, Baronia skyrocketed around Melbourne at large. Children were no longer allowed outside by themselves, and the streets were patrolled by cops and citizens alike, all hoping to get their hands on this newly arrived serial kidnapper haunting the Baronia area. A tremendous amount of resources by the Knox Police Department was put forth into the specific investigation, with the details between Bong and the second girl's cases signaling to even the most expert officials that a serious situation had surfaced. That was until the July 2011 when the 11-year-old girl revealed to her parents and then to police that she had fabricated her entire story regarding the attempted abduction. There was no man in the surgical mask and everyone was left right back where they started. So despite this false lead, is it possible there was a serial criminal active in the streets of Melbourne that February? While it can't be ruled out, it's now thought to be highly unlikely. The only known cases of missing teenage girls, or at least attempts of such to happen in that area, and at that time were the cases of Bong Sarabund and the unidentified 16-year-old Caucasian girl a week later. Without the support of a third abduction, there were too many holes between the other two profiles to draw a concrete connection. Serial kidnappers almost always target victims of the same race and with the same modus operandi, such as a preferred time of day. It may not seem like a big deal that the Ringwood girl was just 3 years older, but the contrast of physical appearance between a 13-year-old Asian girl and a 16-year-old Caucasian girl would be too great to draw meaningful conclusions. Had there been other attempts, more data points could be infused in the analysis to show investigators if there truly was a boogeyman-like character prowling the neighborhoods. But as it stands, we must conclude that the Ringwood abduction attempt was probably not related to Bung's disappearance and was at the hands of a different perpetrator. So of course, we arrive at the grand question, who could that perpetrator be? Australia isn't necessarily known for its long history with serial killers or disastrous rates of violent crime, but it still has its fair share of criminals and potential repeat offenders. The most oft-theorized connection in regards to Bung is that of infamous child serial rapist, Mr. Cruel, whose horrifying moniker needs very little explanation. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mr. Cruel was an anonymous Australian man who broke into the houses of 3 young girls: an unidentified 11-year-old girl from Lower Plenty, 10-year-old Sharon Wills of Ringwood, and 13-year-old Nicola Linus of Canterbury, and gagged, binded, and assaulted them, sometimes kidnapping them to an undisclosed location before releasing them in a nondescript public location hours later. All 3 cases happened under the cloak of darkness between 11:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m., all in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Mr. Krull never left behind forensic evidence and conducted covert surveillance on each family before breaking into their homes. He was so intelligent, he used red herrings to distract police and throw off detectives while threatening to kill his victims if they acted up during his attacks. Mr. Cruel was known for his tailored black balaclava he wore during one of his crimes, as depicted in the widely circulated and spine-chilling police sketch, and has had over $1 million worth of rewards offered by police for any information that might lead to his identification or arrest. He was the Australian version of the Golden State Killer and thought to have had over a dozen other victims before the 3 confirmed and connected rapes starting in 1987. Another suspected victim of Mr. Cruel came in the fall of 1991 when on April 13th, an unidentified male abducted 13-year-old Carmine Shawn of Templestowe, a classmate of an earlier victim, Nicola Linus. Carmine had been taken at knife point, but unlike the other 3 confirmed victims, she wasn't found until a year later when her body was discovered with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. To this day, authorities have neither confirmed nor denied a connection between Mr. Cruel and Carmine's unsolved murder. But until it solves, the similarities have to be taken into account. Carmine was of the same age as the other girls, lived in the same area as the other girls, and was taken at knife points and killed by a handgun, the 2 weapons preferred by Mr. Cruel during his reign of terror. The only major difference was that Carmine was of Asian descent, doubling as the sign that Bong could be a victim of Mr. Cruel too. While it took place 20 years after the peak of Mr. Cruel's crimes, Bong disappeared in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne without a trace, hinting that her kidnapper had planned her abduction. So it would appear to have happened in an instant with zero witnesses. The Carmine was indeed killed by Mr. It's possible that the case could have marked the beginning of a serial predator targeting young Asian schoolgirls, following a pattern similar to that of many serial criminals who evolved from rapists to murderers, much like the Golden State Killer. However, there are several factors that argue against any involvement from Mr. Cruel. The biggest point is his usual operating pattern. Mr. Cruel typically committed his crimes under the cover of darkness, spacing his attacks a year or two apart in order to gather information about his victims before striking. Additionally, he did not strike again for decades, and there was no sign of his presence in the Melbourne area between the turn of the millennium and February 2011. Bong was taken in broad daylight, during rush hour, on semi-busy streets in a neighborhood where many residents were awake and alert. For Mr. Cruel to have changed his methods to such a drastic degree, and after so many years, would be illogical unless he had spent the 2 decades in hiding, building the courage to attack during the day without his trademark balaclava. This makes it unlikely that Mr. Cruel was involved in Bong's case. There are simply too many differences between the timing of his known crimes and Bong's abduction. That being said, we must ask if there could be other notorious individuals in the Melbourne area responsible for Bong's disappearance. One such person of interest emerged in August 2012, when a 24-year-old Australian man called the police claiming to have inside knowledge about Bong Saraban's fate. The man admitted to accidentally hitting Bong with his car the morning of July 2nd, 2011 and disposing of her body by burying her at a local reserve instead of alerting the authorities due to fear of persecution. However, there simply wasn't enough information to keep him in confinement, and he was released after his confession. Then 2 months later, in October of 2012, the 24-year-old was detained and interrogated once again, but for whatever reason was released the second time without enough proof to keep him imprisoned. By the end of the year, law enforcement announced the man was no longer considered a major suspect after securing no other information to support his claim. Man could not provide any hard proof that he had hit Bong, and when he led the cops to the reserve where her body was supposedly buried, the detectives found absolutely no forensic or even circumstantial evidence to support his claim. They even compounded the man's vehicle that was said to have been involved but once more found nothing. The person of interest tag was still applied, but according to the task force, his confession was doubted and the team moved on to pursue other leads. In all honesty, that's probably the smartest move. For a man to hit and kill a young girl on her walk to school, it would have had to happen on a busy road where the man could have been going speeds high enough to inflict death. The only road buying travel that could theoretically cause this was busy enough that not even the most skilled criminal could have snuck the body away without anyone seeing or leaving behind any physical clues and then burying the body miles away in a public reserve. This man was more than likely mentally ill, looking for the spotlight in some ill sense, and made a false confession to gain attention. He may still be a person of interest in the eyes of the police, but we fully believe his testimony to be a real-world red herring. Too many high-profile cold cases see their fair share of people coming forward with manufactured information to gain 15 minutes of fame. And this is regrettably one of those instances. Another person of interest was first detailed by the folks over at Unsolved on their own profiling of Bong's disappearance. They posited the theory that noted serial rapist and murderer Gregory Keith Davies could somehow be involved. Davies' criminal background began all the way back in 1968 with convictions of fraud and larceny, then exploded into attempted murder with intent to cause grievous bodily harm in 1971 against a 14-year-old girl. Davies was acquitted on the basis of insanity claims by the defense and held under detainment by the governor until November of 1982. His release then led to the rape and murder of Kylie Marbury, a 6-year-old girl, 2 years later in 1984. However, because Davies could provide an alibi, police never collected his DNA after interviewing him, and he walked free for over 30 years. Until in 2016, authorities finally recovered a DNA sample and matched it with DNA found at Mabry's crime scene. Davies pleaded guilty to imprisonment, rape, and murder charges a year later, and he now sits in prison without the chance of parole until February 1945. Davies is an interesting suspect because of the wide range of open timeline in which he could have committed other child murders. Various brave women have come forward in the few years since his arrest claiming to have survived multiple assaults at the hands of Davies. Police are on their side too, understanding Davies to probably be the perpetrator of numerous other crimes, including those left unsolved. While Davies hasn't confessed to anything related to Bung, his unknown activity during the time she vanished, as well as his age range in selecting victims, could point to him being a credible suspect. There's also another unsettling connection between Davies and Bong's case. If you'll remember the two sightings of Bong we previously examined, you'll remember how both of those sightings involved a white vehicle and a male driver. Well, it just so happens in the 30 years between detainments, Davies has been confirmed to have owned and operated an older modeled white Holden HQ station wagon. Now Davies does not match the description of the driver in the Holden station wagon from the second Bunny sighting, but he does match the driver in the first sighting who drove a like modeled white sedan. Davies does not have a colorful tattoo. However, it is not outside the realms of possibility that the details of these two sightings were inaccurate and that the white car that was driven by a man in his 60s was a Holden HQ. Davies would have been 62 and 62 in 2011 and could have been wearing something around his neck that could appear as a tattoo from a brief glimpse of someone who saw him driving by. While it is undeniably enticing to believe Davies was the man in the sightings and Bong was the girl in the back seat of the white car, it is also a textbook example of coincidental circumstance. Keep in mind that Davies was active in the northern Melbourne suburbs about 30 kilometers northwest of the Baronian neighborhoods. Yes, it certainly is possible that he could have been active in surrounding communities, but it also would have required unbelievable amounts of stealth and learning of the Baronia streets and traffic patterns. Again, the potential does exist, but it would require us to accept that Davies avoided leaving a single trace of evidence as a 62-year-old man when he was unable to do so in previous murders as a younger, more able-bodied person. Of course, this is all speculation, but until he is proven otherwise, Davies must still be considered as a strong person of interest. And because he is still alive, the chance of a confession exists if he is indeed guilty. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Bong Siribun's unsolved disappearance, we want to make known that our conclusions are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each episode, and we do not attempt to promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and report. In the case of Bung Siribun, we agree with investigators that Bung was kidnapped from the streets of her route to school by a skilled and highly intelligent criminal with a sick perversion for her specifically. How did this person find and single out Bong? It is hard to say. It was well known by police and Bong's friends and family that she was active on social media and the internet at large, owning more than one Facebook account, and always online in her spare time on the computer. While experts who dissected her social media accounts and browser history say, there was nothing suspicious to suggest she met someone online. It's also possible someone found one of her profiles and started stalking her digitally. If not, whoever it was, the kidnapper could also have lived in one of the neighborhoods traversed by Bong on her way to school. The offender most likely followed her discreetly each day, either on foot or by car, absorbing the atmospheric conditions and making detailed notes of the schedules of those around them. They probably canvassed the streets like this for weeks, maybe even months, making sure that they had her patterns down to 80 and was 100% confident they could strike when no one was looking. Then they waited for the perfect opportunity when the weather was bad to keep less wandering neighbors inside and less traffic on the roads. In addition, the perpetrator had to have known Bong walked with friends, and thus needed a morning when she walked alone in order to avoid any witnesses. When June 2nd came and the rains fell and Bong isolated herself on her final journey to Baronia Heights College, tragedy struck like a bolt of lightning, with the monster themselves implementing infinite hours of planning to commit the unthinkable crime. So who could this evil kidnapper be? We believe that rather than a serial offender, this specific perpetrator was only targeting Bong specifically. And while they may have been a petty criminal previously, they weren't snatching children off the street left and right. Could this kidnapper have been the same man who attempted to take that 16-year-old girl on June 21st? Cannot be ruled out. However, this person was probably only interested in Bong, explaining why there was no string of similar disappearances in Boronia or Melbourne at large around that time frame. It could have been a teacher at school, a close but not too close family friend, a neighbor with their blinds closed and one eye looking out. It could have been, and probably is, someone who the police overlooked, who doesn't have an obvious record that screams child abductor. And that may be the most frightening of all. The bomb was taken at the hands of someone still among us, who appears to be someone just like you or I, never suspected to be holding a dark, deadly secret. Whoever it is, they most likely left Melbourne to avoid local police and making a mistake, now watching from a distance, telling themselves they've won when they most certainly have not. Together with combined courage and persistence, we can put a spotlight on whoever that person is and find Bang Sirbun hopefully alive to bring her home to a family and community whose only wish is for justice. In the midst of the uncertainty surrounding Ban's disappearance, it is important to remember the brightness of her life and the many ways in which she touched the world. Ban was not just an exceptional student, but also an insightful artist and a compassionate friend. Her passion for life was evident in all she did. She adored the beach, spending hours swimming in the waters behind her grandparents' home, where the sunlight reflected off the ocean in the same way her eyes sparkled with wonder. Ban expressed herself through both drawing and dance, pouring her creativity into vibrant works that spoke to her soul. Beyond her own personal endeavors, Ban was always ready to lend a hand. She enjoyed gardening on weekends and sharing joyful moments with her friends, like ice cream sundaes. What stood out the most about Bam was her ability to find happiness effortlessly and connect with anyone around her. She lifted up those who needed it, offering support without hesitation. Ban Sirbun was on a path to making an impact on her community and the world, one filled with boundless potential. Her kind heart and vibrant spirit would have left a lasting legacy. As we continue searching for answers, we must hold on to the hope that she will be found, and one day her promise will be realized. Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She was part of a large family with 5 children and grew up in a quiet neighborhood, far from the noise of the city. During the summer of 1975, at the age of 14, Christy spent most of her time with her friends and sisters. Their favorite hangout spot was the pool at a nearby residential complex, especially on sweltering summer days. In addition to spending time with friends, Christy occasionally worked as a babysitter, caring for the children of people she knew. On August 22nd, one of them asked her to watch their child until late in the evening. The following day, Christy slept in until around noon and found herself wondering how to pass the time. With her birthday just 5 days away, she was filled with anticipation, making the hours seem to drag. The day was particularly scorching, with temperatures climbing to 93 degrees. Christy quickly decided that going to the pool would be the perfect way to pass the time and escape the heat. She took her younger sister, Kim, along, and the two headed to the residential complex. While Kim immediately jumped into the water, Christy chose to relax on a deck chair. Not long after, a friend approached her, and after a brief conversation, the two walked away together. Kim was surprised that her sister had left without saying anything but chose to stay at the pool rather than follow her. After some time, Kim returned home, only to find that Christy wasn't there. As the hours passed with no sign of her, she began to grow concerned. Determined to find her sister, Kim walked around the neighborhood searching for her. Along the way, she ran into a neighbor who mentioned that the police had discovered a girl's body a few miles away about an hour earlier, but they hadn't been able to identify her. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Panicked, Kim rushed home to inform her parents, who immediately contacted the police, explaining that their daughter was missing. The family was instructed to go to the morgue, where officers presented them with the body of the deceased girl. At first, Christy's parents struggled to recognize her due to the severe bruising on her face. However, her mother soon spotted a familiar birthmark on the girl's leg and realized, with heartbreaking certainty, that it was Christy. Once her identity was confirmed, the police shared the devastating details of what had happened. At approximately 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report the discovery of a body in the wooded area behind a shopping center. He, his wife, and their son had gone there to buy a toy for their daughter. Before entering the store, their son asked to take a walk in the wooded area behind the building. The location was known for its scenic walking trail that led to the river, making it a popular spot for strolls. His parents agreed, and the family ventured along the path, exploring the forest. As they were making their way back, they noticed something unusual a few yards off the trail, something that immediately caught their attention. As they moved closer, they saw a man on the ground, leaning over someone and repeatedly striking them with a piece of wood. Upon noticing the family, the man immediately got up and fled. The father rushed to the spot and found a young girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, attempted to check for a pulse but was unable to find one. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the man sprinted to the shopping center and used a phone inside one of the stores to call the police. Both he and his wife provided investigators with a description of the attacker. He was described as a young man, around 20 years old, tall and slender, with shoulder-length dark hair. At the time of the attack, he was wearing only jeans, shorts, and boots. Using their account, the police created a sketch of the suspect and distributed it to patrol officers. However, despite examining the crime scene thoroughly, investigators found no significant evidence. Officers recovered the piece of wood used as the murder weapon, but they were unable to find any evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. Notably, Christie's hands were bound with a telephone cord, and her bikini top had been pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body, yet forensic experts found no signs of sexual assault. Investigators theorized that the attacker may have intended to assault her, but was interrupted and fled the scene. Despite the initial lack of leads, police soon had a direction to pursue. Christie's younger sister revealed that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol, prompting investigators to speak with her. Carol explained that earlier that day, she had received a phone call at home from an unknown man who claimed to be a DJ from a local radio station. He told her about an upcoming cheerleading competition in town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. According to him, the event was set to take place behind the shopping center at 1:45 p.m. The caller instructed Carol to wait at the entrance of the wooded trail, where someone would meet her and provide more details about the event. To the police, this story already seemed highly suspicious, but there were even more puzzling details. Carol explained that she originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they ran into Christy and her younger sister. After chatting briefly, Carol invited Christy to join her, leaving their sisters behind as they headed toward the shopping center. When the girls arrived at the entrance to the woods, they sat on a fence and waited, but no one ever showed up. After some time, Carol decided to go into the shopping center to check the time. She was only gone for a few minutes, but when she returned, Christy had vanished. Carol waited a little longer, but when no one appeared, she eventually left. Investigators could find no record of any cheerleading competition taking place in town. They speculated that the caller may have been the killer, attempting to lure Carol into the woods. Alternatively, it was possible that the call was an unrelated prank, and Christie's disappearance was a tragic coincidence. Regardless, authorities were unable to trace the call, making it impossible to determine the caller's identity. Investigators also noticed inconsistencies in Carol's account. She claimed that she ran into Christy and her sister while walking to the shopping center. However, Kim firmly maintained that they had been at the pool when Carol approached them there. But that wasn't the only suspicious detail. Later that evening, Christy's mother had a strange encounter with Carol, who lived just a short distance from their home. During their conversation, Carol unexpectedly began apologizing, saying that things were never supposed to escalate this far. She went on to claim that she was the intended target and that 2 people had been involved in the murder. Stunned, Christy's mother pressed for more details, but Carol abruptly ended the conversation and walked away. Alarmed by what she had just heard, Christy's mother immediately reported the conversation to the police. Investigators questioned Carol again, but this time, She denied ever making such a statement. She stood by her original story and refused to provide any additional information. Later, Carol underwent another round of questioning, this time with a polygraph test. The examiner found no indications of deception when she answered key questions. With no further evidence linking her to the crime, investigators shifted their focus elsewhere and continued searching for leads. As news of the brutal murder spread throughout the city, fear took hold of the local residents. People were on edge, knowing that a dangerous killer was still at large. The situation became even more unsettling when detectives shared their belief that the perpetrator was likely a local. The killer had demonstrated knowledge of the wooded trail behind the shopping center, an area familiar mostly to those who lived nearby. Determined to track down the suspect, detectives deployed all available resources. Then, 3 days after Christie's murder, they had their first major breakthrough. Around 5 p.m., a police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The officer immediately alerted detectives, who arrived at the scene without delay. They approached the man and asked if he would come to the station for questioning. Without resistance, he agreed. The man was identified as 25-year-old Jack Carnell. Although he willingly agreed to answer their questions, investigators quickly encountered a challenge. Jack had a significant intellectual disability. Various tests estimated his IQ to be around 50. He was under the care of a specialized medical facility and lived in an apartment provided by a non-profit organization, where he also worked. Jack was unable to read or write and had difficulty speaking clearly. However, detectives couldn't overlook his strong resemblance to the composite sketch of Christie's killer. The interrogation process proved to be extremely difficult. For most of the questioning, Jack either responded with single-word answers or remained completely silent. Investigators even began to question whether he fully understood the meaning of their questions. Despite these challenges, the interrogation continued for 6 hours. Progress was slow, but eventually, detectives began to gain some traction. By keeping their questions as simple and direct as possible, detectives eventually obtained a long-awaited confession from Jack. According to his account, he had left his apartment that day and taken a bus to the shopping center with the intention of buying new pants and a shirt. As he walked through the parking lot toward the entrance, he noticed Christie sitting on a fence near the start of the wooded trail. He claimed that he approached her, grabbed her, tied her hands, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. When Christie attempted to escape, Jack chased after her. He then picked up a piece of wood from the ground and struck her multiple times on the head before fleeing to the main road, where he caught a bus. The following day, police took him back to the crime scene, where he pointed out the exact location of the attack. He also provided details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the wooden weapon had broken in half when he used it to strike the victim. To further verify his confession, detectives arranged a lineup, including Jack, and asked the witnesses who had discovered Christie to identify the man they had seen that day. Both pointed to Jack. He was charged with several offenses, including assault and murder. Despite the fact that experts didn't find any evidence of sexual assault, Jack confessed to it, so the prosecution decided not to exclude it. The prosecutors sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer, with his consent, struck a deal. Jack had to admit his guilt before the judge and receive a life sentence instead of execution. Given that thousands of people were closely following the case, events unfolded rapidly. On September 3rd, just 11 days after the murder, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, doubts about his guilt began to surface. As more details about his confession and background were revealed in the media, many people started questioning whether he was truly responsible. Those who knew Jack personally found it hard to believe he could have committed such a violent act. According to them, he had never shown any signs of aggression. In fact, he was known to be passive, timid, and overly compliant. He had a history of agreeing to things just to appease others, even if they weren't true. For instance, while at a charity center, he once took the blame for breaking a boiler, even though someone else was responsible. Questions also arose about whether Jack had even been capable of confessing to the crime in the way detectives claimed. He could barely speak, Yet the police claimed that he had told them about the crime in utmost detail. Those who knew Jack believed that the investigators had simply fed him all the necessary information. They just needed to ask leading questions that already contained facts about the case. For example, did he strike the victim with a piece of wood? And if Jack answered yes, the police could already use it as a confession. One woman who was involved in Jack's treatment added that under threat, he could confess to anything. It was enough for him to hear that he faced the electric chair and he would do whatever the detectives asked. But that's not all. Supporters of Jack's innocence found out that the police had brought him to the murder scene at the same time as the witnesses. The same married couple who later identified him among other people at the police station. So, they had already seen Jack and knew that he was a suspect. The police had claimed that the witnesses didn't cross paths with Jack, but no one believed it. There were many more facts that raised strong doubts about Jack's involvement. For example, the police couldn't find the bus driver or even a single who saw Jack on the way to the city center. According to his own confession, that's how he got home. But the most significant factor was the testimony of several people in the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked. They claimed to have seen him around 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, he had absolutely no chance of taking a bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of the city and committing the murder by 1:50 p.m. Even if he had left immediately after being seen by the witnesses, even Christie's parents started to doubt that he was the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, around 70 people gathered in front of the city hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. Determined to seek justice, supporters formed a public committee advocating for Jack's case to be re-examined. This effort helped Jack secure a new lawyer, who quickly filed for a case review. Several months later, a judge ruled to revoke Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to build their case from the ground up, an extremely difficult task given the circumstances. While preparations for the retrial were underway, Christie's father, Norman Mills, launched his own investigation. From the very beginning, he doubted the detectives' work, believing they weren't doing enough to find his daughter's real killer. Unwilling to rely solely on law enforcement, he took matters into his own hands. Shortly after the murder, Norman and some neighbors went to the woods to inspect the area themselves. There, a pair of jean shorts and blood-stained men's underwear, evidence that the police had initially overlooked. They turned the items over to investigators, raising even more concerns about how thoroughly the case had been handled. However, it remained unknown whether these items were linked to the case or even tested. The new trial for Jack began only in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence, and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for this role, whom they considered the most likely suspect, the man who found Christie's body with his wife. His name was Henry Newell, and at the time of the murder, he was 25 years old. By the start of the trial, Jack's lawyers had gathered an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry for the murder, and during the trial, this list grew even longer. Initially, Henry drew attention because of his criminal record. Starting from his teenage years, he had been arrested numerous times for various offenses, serving 3 prison terms. He had successfully escaped from jail twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence. This time, Henry had set his own house on fire to collect insurance money. The lawyers had also reviewed the evidence from Christie's case and found several very suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry said he found her body, ran up to it, and tossed aside a blood-stained piece of wood. He explained this by saying he was in a state of shock at the time, but such an action still seemed odd. Why would he pick up the murder weapon and throw it away from the body without any apparent reason? He claimed he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he really try to stop the bleeding? Or did his shirt get bloody during the murder and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyers found a store employee in the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said he wasn't wearing a shirt, but had jean shorts on, although by the time the police arrived, he was already wearing different pants. The employee also claimed Henry had a fresh spruce on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately tell the police about this, she said no one simply asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed the spruce, but they ignored him. Back then, Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine, so the police didn't arrange a new test. Another witness was Henry's neighbor. He said that on the night of the murder, he spoke with Henry and noticed many fresh scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage of the same color and shape as the one used to tie the victim's hands. But that's not all. The neighbor stated that Henry once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Carol, Christie's 14-year-old friend, and that they used to swim naked together in the pool. Considering he was 25 at the time, this story shocked everyone's case. However, finding any direct evidence that this actually happened was simply impossible. Yet, it indicated that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who also had a direct connection to the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court. She said everything had happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. They went to the mall and their son wanted to take a walk. They went to the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had been at home and only stepped out for a few minutes to chase away the neighborhood kids who had started throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified. She stated that she had never met Henry. She was also asked about what she had meant when she told Mother that things shouldn't have escalated so far. But Carol once again claimed she didn't remember saying anything like that. Henry himself was also brought into the courtroom from prison. He repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most significant moments of the trial was the display of the full recording of Jack's interrogation. After viewing it became apparent to everyone that Jack was simply coerced into confirming the detective's words that he had committed the murder. Jack barely spoke and apparently didn't fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that wasn't the most crucial moment of the trial. On the fifth day, another unexpected witness appeared, either anticipated by the prosecution nor Jack's lawyers. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. The boy revealed that on that day, Henry did indeed leave the house to chase away kids throwing firecrackers in their yard. However, he was gone for more than just a few minutes, as his mother had claimed, but for over half an hour. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and he had scratches on his arms and face. Henry called Pam into another room where they had a conversation. After that, they came out and told Bobby that they were all going to the shopping center. Upon arriving, the parents immediately led him to the trail behind the shopping center. The boy claimed that he hadn't asked to go there for a walk, as his parents had initially stated. They entered the woods and almost immediately found Henry's sandals, one of which was torn. A little further, they saw Christie's body, and his mother instructed Bobby never to tell anyone about what he saw. The boy added that he only decided to tell the truth after having a conversation with his biological father, who had convinced him to do the right thing. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted one strange episode involving Henry. She, along with him and Pam, attended Christie's farewell ceremony. On the way back, the woman said what a tragedy it was, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness was Henry's friend. He said that Henry once confessed to him that he killed Christie. He added that the killing was accidental, not planned. In the end, this trial left practically no doubt that Jack had no involvement in the crime, and eventually, all charges against him were dropped. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing it. He pointed out that the police either failed to notice or ignored a vast amount of clues and evidence available to them from day one. His response sparked a wave of public outrage. It reached such heights that 2 days later, the prosecutor had to backtrack and agree to reopen the investigation into Christie's case. But here was a serious problem. Investigators relied on the initial investigation, including the testimonies of Henry and Pam. In other words, the police still operated under the assumption that the couple stumbled upon Christie's body in the woods, with a long-haired, shirtless man looming over her. For this reason, investigators stated that they would be looking for new suspects resembling Jack. Of course, such an approach yielded no results. The investigation continued for several months, and eventually this case went cold. Christie's father never gave up on seeking justice. Once, he filed a civil lawsuit against Jack. But the reason for such a move were not as simple as it might have seemed. The man didn't believe in Jack's involvement in the murder, but this legal process would have granted him access to the case files, giving him the opportunity to collect all the available information. Unfortunately, this also yielded no results. In February 2006, Christie's father passed away from cancer, never having closure in the case. For a long time, there was no progress in the investigation of Christie's murder until February 2013, when former attorney John Aller took an interest in the case. He decided to conduct his own investigation, reaching out to all involved parties, hoping to find new leads. Christie's relatives handed him a box containing all of her father's records, which he had been gathering up until his death. Aller went through them all, spoke to dozens of people, and it became evident to him that the culprit behind this murder was none other than Henry. During his investigation, he found out that Christie's friend, Carol, was into smoking marijuana at the time. Digging deeper, he uncovered something else and concluded that she, like some other teenagers, apparently was buying it from Henry. This became another link between him and Carol and could indicate the real reason why the girl went to that forest. He theorized that the whole story about the DJ was simply made up, and in reality, Carol arranged to meet Henry in the forest to buy the illegal substance. Perhaps, she decided to invite Christie along under some other pretext, such as using the same story about the DJ in cheerleading competition. Another, much darker version suggested that Carol may have initially lured Christie there at Henry's request, who had planned to assault her. However, the girl fought back, as evidenced by the scratches and bruises on his body, and the man killed her. Delving deeper into the case, Uller discovered that by that time, Henry had committed even more crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. There was another incident linked to him, but he wasn't tried for it, the death of his wife, Pam. In 1982, she filed for divorce, and just a month later, she was found dead in their apartment where she still lived with Henry. The official cause of death was a sleeping pill over the house, and the police found a note indicating that she did it herself. Pam's relatives didn't believe this version and suspected that Henry had tampered with the pills. The strangest part of this whole story was that no package of sleeping pills was found in the apartment, even though Pam obviously couldn't have disposed of it after taking such a large amount. That same year, 2013, when Aller took on the case, Henry passed away from cancer at the age of 63. Despite this, Aller continued his work and released a book containing all available information about Christie's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest in the case, and Christie's relatives, along with other people, began demanding to reopen the investigation. Several of Henry's relatives who killed the girl, but kept silent. One of them recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry had given her a car as a gift. They went for a ride together, and at some point he asked her to stop, looked at her, and said that he had killed Christie, detailing the crime in full. The woman said she couldn't believe it. According to her, Henry had been drinking a lot, and she thought he had simply made up this story under the influence of alcohol. However, after reading Alla's book, everything fell into place for her. All of this led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May of 2014. For many months, detectives re-examined all the available evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and re-evaluated the leads. In his confession to his relative, Henry mentioned that he had assaulted Christie. At the time of the original investigation, medical experts found no evidence of sexual assault. However, with advancements in forensic technology, Christie's clothing was re-examined decades later, revealing traces of semen. Unfortunately, the sample was too small for DNA analysis, preventing investigators from definitively identifying the perpetrator. The case remained open until late 2015, when detectives held a press conference. 40 years after Christie's murder, they publicly announced that they were certain Henry was responsible. However, since Henry had passed away, they could not prosecute him, and the case was officially declared solved and closed. Without a confession from Henry, investigators could never be completely certain about every detail of what happened that day. However, based on their findings, they pieced together a likely scenario. They suspected that Henry had gone to the wooded trail behind the shopping center that day, possibly to meet Carol for a drug deal. While they couldn't confirm Carol's involvement, the theory suggested that her presence may have played a role in Christie's tragic fate. Once Henry spotted Christie alone, he allegedly decided to attack her. He restrained her hands using a phone cord and led her deeper into the woods, where she fiercely resisted. Christie managed to scratch and strike him, but Henry overpowered her, knocking her down before fatally striking her with a piece of wood. Afterward, he returned home and confided in his wife, and together, they devised a plan to shield him from any consequences. Notably, Carol never came forward with the full truth, even after all these years. There remains a possibility that she was involved in some capacity, though whether she will ever disclose more details is uncertain. During their press conference, the police formally apologized to Christie's family, acknowledging the failures of the original investigators. Evidence that could have pointed to Henry as the culprit had been available from the start, yet it was either overlooked or disregarded. In the end, while the case was officially closed, lingering questions remain.